All our stories are created for entertainment purposes only.
I'm a 35-year-old guy, and my wife is 34. We first met back in college, and it was love at first sight. Funny enough, we didn't really cross paths until our senior year when we were in the same thesis group. Even though we came from different states, we both fell in love with the city our school was in and decided to stick around after graduation. We intentionally didn't move in together right away because we wanted to avoid putting too much pressure on our relationship. We continued dating as usual for about a year post-graduation, and then we decided it was time to live together. I never once doubted our relationship. I always knew she was the one for me, and I had plans to marry her. I popped the question when we were 25, and it took some of our friends from school by surprise. Some folks didn't think we'd go the distance, but they never really explained why. Maybe it was because we were complete opposites. I was the quiet, introverted type, while she was outgoing and had her moments of being quite loud. She had this magnetic personality that drew people in, and that was one of the things I loved most about her. Fast forward, and we spent 12 wonderful years together. We had 3 amazing kids, a lovely home, and we were even making retirement plans, thinking about moving to a small town in Vermont. Unfortunately, my wife chose to throw all of that away. She had a high-powered job as a marketing executive that involved a lot of travel, especially managing overseas clients. I always believed our marriage was rock solid, so I never worried when she went on business trips. I knew she enjoyed sightseeing and had friends in different countries, but I never suspected infidelity until I stumbled upon a pregnancy test in her bathroom while she was away. After our 3rd child, we decided we were done expanding our family. We explored our options and realized that the most cost-effective and least intrusive way to prevent further pregnancies was for me to get a vasectomy. So I went ahead with the procedure. Following that, my wife stopped taking birth control, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, my suspicions were aroused when I stumbled upon a pregnancy test in the trash while cleaning my bathroom. Looking back, my wife had been showing signs of morning sickness, but finding the test suggested that she could still potentially get pregnant, and I knew it wasn't by me. At the time I found the test, my wife was traveling abroad, and there was a significant time difference between us. She had told me she was going to bed when we last spoke around 4 p.m. my time. Out of curiosity, I checked her location using my iPhone and discovered that she wasn't at her hotel but at a restaurant in Stockholm. If she had wanted to go out to dinner with a friend, she could have simply told me, and I wouldn't have had an issue with it. Instead, she chose to lie about going to bed, which made me suspicious about her activities. Driven by these doubts, I entered her office and accessed her computer. Fortunately for me, she had written down her login credentials inside her notebook. I started searching through her emails, hoping to find any evidence of an affair, and my suspicions were confirmed. It appeared that she was having a romantic relationship with a client she had gone on a work trip to meet. The emails included pictures and updates about their lives, and the message chain stretched back 3 years, possibly even further. They shared details about their families and future plans. Some messages were friendly, while others were explicitly intimate. Upon further investigation, I learned who this man was. I already knew he was a client, but I had no idea that my wife had met him while studying abroad in college, and they had remained in contact ever since. She had known him even before she met me. It seemed like both of them continued with their regular lives, including their families and jobs. But whenever they had the chance, they would meet up for intimate encounters. I spent the entire night digging through the extensive history they shared, trying to piece together everything. It devastated me. I loved my wife more than anything in the world, and she had hidden such a significant secret from me throughout our entire relationship. I felt like I didn't even know the person I was married to, and I knew I couldn't stay with someone who could lie to me like that. So, the first thing in the morning, I contacted a divorce attorney and sent them all the documents I had collected, complete with screenshots from my wife's computer. In addition to all the shocking discoveries, I stumbled upon some intriguing business secrets involving my wife and her affair partner. I thought her boss should be aware of these details. It turned out that her overseas work trips were entirely unnecessary. She was creating fake expenses for these trips and charging them to the company. There were private conversations between her and the other men where they planned their rendezvous and came up with believable excuses for work. It added another layer to my wife's deceit. I didn't confront my wife when I found out everything. Instead, I decided to wait until she got home. However, when she texted me before her 13-hour flight back, I had a sudden idea to unveil everything to her while she was still unaware. I reached out to her boss and shared all the evidence with him. He was shocked by the information and mentioned that he would speak to others to gather more details. Meanwhile, I packed a few bags for myself and the kids and went to stay at my mother's house. We didn't want to be around when my wife returned home. Later that day, I put my kids to bed and eagerly awaited my wife's phone calls as she realized the gravity of the situation. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, I received numerous text messages and calls from her, urging me that we needed to talk. She inquired about our whereabouts with the kids, and I simply responded that I was filing for divorce, and the kids were safe with me and their grandmother. She eventually came over to the house, demanding to see the kids while they were asleep, causing quite a scene. I showed her the kids to assure her they were okay, and then I insisted that she leave. I suggested that she consult a divorce attorney and be prepared for whatever her boss had in store for her. She argued that I had no right to invade her personal space like I did, and she even threatened to sue me. I wasn't sure how strong her case would be, but I decided to discuss it with my divorce attorney just in case. Interestingly, a similar situation seemed to have occurred with her affair partner overseas. I reported the misuse of company time and funds to his employer, although I didn't know them personally. I started following his wife on social media to see if there were any updates. Eventually, she did leave him. I went through with my divorce, and my wife put up a fierce fight in court. However, there weren't any grounds for her to sue me in any way. In addition to our divorce, her former employer filed an embezzlement case against her for misusing company funds. It seems she'll be facing a hefty fine, but jail time is unlikely. Strangely, the embezzlement case worked in my favor during the custody hearing. Now, I'm happily living my life without her. It was painful at first, and it took a lot of adjustment, but I eventually realized she wasn't the person I thought she was. The woman I married would never have treated me the way she did. I'm grateful that I discovered her true nature and left her when I had the chance. Story 2. My wife and I were married for 8 years and we shared 2 children together. I loved her deeply and would have done anything to keep our family together, but she ended up destroying it all. We initially connected through a dating app and quickly began dating after matching. Our connection was instant, and it felt like we were meant to be together. Things became more serious when she became pregnant with our first child. I believe the news about the pregnancy sped up our relationship, but neither of us minded. We were thrilled and deeply in love. My wife gave birth to our lovely daughter, and our happiness knew no bounds. We tied the knot after our daughter was born and soon settled into a nice house. The order of things might have seemed a bit unconventional, but it all worked out in the end, or so I thought. The initial years of our marriage were a bit turbulent. We hadn't known each other for very long before she became pregnant, and we were already living together at the time. Being in such close proximity highlighted the differences in our personalities. I've always been outgoing and extroverted, eager to seize every opportunity and embrace life. My wife, on the other hand, was more reserved and enjoyed relaxation. Sometimes I felt like my energy level was too high for her. We did have occasional arguments, but we always managed to resolve them amicably and move forward. I thought open communication was one of our strengths. Whenever there was an argument we couldn't resolve immediately, and if either of us was upset, my wife would spend the night at her sister's house. I knew she needed to vent and get things off her chest, and in the morning we would have a calm discussion. However, all these feelings were magnified when our second child was born. Please don't misunderstand me. I adore my son more than anything. But as a newborn, he was quite a handful. He would stay awake crying all night, and it took hours to get him to sleep. During that first month, everyone in the house was sleep-deprived and on edge. I hate to admit it because it might sound like a stereotypical and unhealthy thing to say, but my wife stayed home to take care of the kids, and I worked about 70 hours a week. When our son was crying at night, I often tried to get as much sleep as possible to be fit for work. I guess I expected my wife to handle most of the child-rearing responsibilities. Several months had passed since the issue with our son crying at night, and I hadn't realized it was still bothering my wife so much. It turned out she was holding on to this grudge, something I had no clue about. One night, we got into a petty argument, and she brought it all up, throwing it in my face like I was a neglectful father and a lousy partner because I hadn't taken care of our son during his late-night crying episodes. I tried explaining my perspective, how I had to work and the exhaustion was taking a toll on me. I reminded her of how often I helped with our daughter, so I couldn't understand why she couldn't see where I was coming from. She was really upset, and eventually, she stormed out, leaving me to take care of both kids for the night. I managed that and waited for her to return the next morning so we could talk things out, just like we always did. However, she came back much later than usual, which frustrated me even more because I had to call in sick for work that day. It seemed like she genuinely didn't care about my time or how her actions affected me. We talked about everything around noon when she got home, and she was unusually apologetic. It seemed like she didn't want to discuss things. She just wanted to agree with whatever I had to say and put an end to the argument. After it was over, she went to say hi to the kids, and we didn't bring it up again. Over the next couple of months, she started acting differently. There was a noticeable spring in her step, and I couldn't figure out what had caused this change. She used to visit her sister once or twice a week, but during that time, she was going almost every other day. I didn't think much of it back then, but now I realize why she was going over there. Sometimes she took the kids, other times she asked me to watch them so she could go alone. I finally learned the truth when I saw her sneak out of bed one night to answer a phone call. She must have forgotten to put her phone on silent because the ringing woke me up. She answered the call before I could ask what was going on and whispered to the person on the other end to hold on before sneaking away from me. It struck me as odd right away. It was unusual for her to receive a call in the middle of the night, let alone answer it and sneak away. I stayed still, pretending not to notice, and waited for her to leave the room. After a minute, I cautiously left the room to investigate. I heard sounds coming from the laundry room, so I pressed my ear against the door to try and eavesdrop. I could hear someone on speakerphone instructing my wife to engage in explicit acts with herself, and it was clear that my wife was enjoying it. My wife had sneaked away to engage in phone intimacy with someone else. I listened for a few minutes while it continued. The person on the other end was speaking in hushed tones, indicating they were both up to no good. I thought about barging in and confronting them, but decided to take a different approach. So I returned to the bedroom and pretended to go to sleep. She didn't return for about half an hour. I stayed awake, waiting until her snores confirmed she was asleep. Then I quietly left the bed, taking her phone with me to the kitchen. I checked her recent call and recognized the name. It was her sister's boyfriend. Her sister, her closest friend, had been dating this guy for 5 years and was deeply in love with him. She saw him as the one, the man she wanted to marry and have a family with. Discovering that my wife was cheating on me was already painful, but the fact that it was with her sister's boyfriend made it so much worse. I was in disbelief. I went through their text messages and saw them planning secret rendezvous when her sister wouldn't be home, exchanging pictures and videos. What enraged me even more was when I found messages of my wife saying she had to bring our kids along with her. I was furious and determined to expose her actions. I took numerous screenshots, saved videos, and sent them to myself. Afterward, I returned her phone to its place and went to sleep in the living room. I couldn't stand to be near her. The next day, I called in sick to work and searched online for a divorce attorney. I found one and arranged a meeting with them as soon as possible to end our marriage. Additionally, I felt compelled to tell her sister everything before my wife had the chance to twist the story. I drove to the restaurant where her sister worked and waited until her shift ended. When I saw her in the parking lot, I asked if we could talk. She appeared confused and a bit nervous, but agreed to join me in my car. That's when I disclosed everything I knew. I showed her the extent of what I had in the videos and screenshots, and it shattered her heart. Her sister, the one person she believed she could trust completely, had betrayed her trust. It left her utterly devastated, and she was in hysterics. Once she calmed down, I asked her what she wanted to do, and she immediately decided to kick her boyfriend out of her house. She got really angry as she talked about it, and I soon realized that he didn't even have a job or contribute to rent. He was basically a broke SoundCloud rapper with no talent. I ended up driving her to her place and stayed with her while she broke up with her boyfriend, evicting him from her house and tossing his belongings out the window. Her boyfriend seemed like he wanted to confront me physically, but he didn't make a move. If he had, I would have probably sent him to the hospital. After all that was settled, she and I returned to my house and confronted my wife. My wife tried to defend herself, claiming that the videos were fake and that I was trying to ruin her. I didn't understand why I would want to do that. Her arguments didn't hold water, and I informed her that she needed to leave the house because I was going through with the divorce. She started crying, begging for forgiveness, and saying she had nowhere else to go. She told her sister that it all just happened one day when she was upset with me. She tried to shift the blame to her boyfriend, claiming he took advantage of her vulnerability and tried to seduce her. He might have been sleazy, but that didn't excuse her actions. If he made an advance, she could have rejected him and then told me and her sister about it. Instead, she slept with him and continued the affair for several months. Now, I've divorced my wife, and I have full custody of the kids. The pivotal factor in the custody decision was her involving the kids in her affair. The judge didn't take kindly to that. Her sister has completely cut ties with her. They don't talk to each other anymore, and according to her sister, many of their family members have also stopped communicating with my wife. However, I still maintain regular contact with her sister because she's my children's aunt. She genuinely cares for them, and I didn't want to deprive my kids of that connection. In the end, I'm grateful I discovered my wife's true nature. Reflecting on our relationship, it's clear that we weren't meant to stay together, and now we're both moving on from it. I do wish the ending could have been different, but I believe everything unfolds for a reason, even if the journey here was bumpier than I'd hoped. Story 3. I've been in a 4-year relationship, and it's had its fair share of ups and downs. We've had some major fights, and it feels like we've never really resolved our problems. Instead, we tend to sweep our issues under the rug. We did one session of couples counseling, and that's when I realized I've lost trust in her. About a year ago, she lied during a business trip, and I suspect she might have cheated. She ended up getting really drunk, crashed at her friend's hotel room, and stayed there from 5 a.m. to 11 a.m. after a wild party at a congress in Miami. I found out by snooping through her phone, which was a terrible move that I deeply regret. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, forgave her, and tried to move forward. For a whole year, I've been working on rebuilding my trust and handling my emotions within the relationship. Now, she's talking about another business trip, but it seems like she doesn't care about my feelings regarding the situation. I've asked for some words of reassurance, but she can't guarantee that she won't get drunk during the Congress. She says I'm being controlling, but I've come to realize through therapy that these are my boundaries, and not an attempt to control her. During couples counseling, we both agreed that whatever happened in that hotel room was considered cheating. It was inappropriate. She comprehends my standpoint logically but struggles to empathize with my emotions. She insists that she did nothing wrong with the guy and just wanted to catch an Uber after sobering up a bit. 6 hours to sober up? During my individual therapy, I've learned that she might be gaslighting me and manipulating my decisions through my feelings. For the past few months, she's been emotionally and physically distant, and even before our fight, things weren't great. Fortunately, I have a support system in my loving family during the holiday season. She's currently on a trip and will be back tomorrow evening. I'm torn between insisting on more couples counseling and trying to work things out or ending the relationship. I'm deeply attached to her emotionally, and the thought of breaking up is daunting, especially considering my struggles with rejection and breakups. What should I do? Edit. Okay, I've taken the plunge and we're separated now. I'm in the process of finding a new place to live. Send me some positive vibes and hopes for a brighter future. We all need someone to lean on from time to time, and now is that time. Update. I've just separated from my cheating wife and she's finally moved out. Hey everyone, things got a bit strange on my end. Check this out or you won't understand what's going on. Last week my partner and I mutually agreed to break up and end our relationship. I took the initiative and talked to her about it. Since then, we've been living together in a civil manner while being separated. However, out of the blue, she suggests that we should have a farewell over some wine and party one last time. My initial reaction was, hell no. But I'm only human, so after a few discussions, I reluctantly agreed. We ended up partying all night, expressing our eternal love for each other, and making promises to work on our marriage. I know, I messed up big time. The next day, I was completely confused and hungover at work, wondering what to do next. When I returned home, I was hoping for some clarity on our situation and wanted to discuss the events of the previous night. However, she was distant, avoided any conversation, and even took a nap to avoid contact. When she woke up, I had to ask, "So, what are we now?" Her cold-blooded response was, "What we talked about before. Come on, last night we were intoxicated. Those were just words. Dude, you should have known better." Reality check, right? Then, today, I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that has happened in the past few days. After talking to some other people, I realized that I was manipulated through my emotions once again. I gave in to her and compromised my feelings and vows of love for someone who constantly seeks validation and admiration from others, showing narcissistic behavior. She sensed that I was pulling away, and she regained control using closeness and manipulation. I still have to live with this person until the end of the year, or more precisely until January 7th when we'll hand over the apartment. I decided it was time to take action. I didn't want this person in my life any longer. They had a way of getting into my head, and I needed to protect myself once and for all. So as soon as she got home from work, I sat her down and laid out the reasons why we should minimize our interaction from now on. I told her how I felt used, abandoned, and lied to again. After that, I stood up and made it clear that I didn't believe her story. I even mentioned that I would share the information with her supposed affair partner's wife. She followed me and started making threats. She threatened to report me to the police, and she even threatened to tell everyone in our social circle that I was crazy. She also mentioned my bipolar condition and warned of dire consequences if I sent anything to her supposed affair partner's wife. In response, I calmly told her that I had my cell phone in my hand and had recorded all her threats. I showed her the evidence, and she froze. Without any further escalation, I sent the message to the guy's wife. The message contained only dates, times, and facts that could be confirmed through Google Maps, Uber, and messaging apps. I informed her of the facts I was aware of, such as them spending one night together on a business trip, but I made it clear that I had no proof they had closeness. At no point did the conversation turn into a shouting match, and there was no physical contact. So, I believe I'm safe from any retaliation from her. However, a bombshell dropped at the guy's house today. She finally left, and her brother came over to take her away. She's gone now, and I feel like I've broken free from her spell. Do you think I went too far? Just to be safe, I've also obtained a police report about her threats.
Story 4. Let me break down the story for you. I had a 6-month relationship with a guy named John, who is now my ex-boyfriend. We initially knew each other because his mom was my manager at a care home, so we were friendly but not super close. At one point, his mom even tried to set us up, but he was in a relationship with someone else for about 2 years, so we didn't talk much during that time. Earlier this year, John broke up with his then-girlfriend, and I was working as a dog walker, and he had a dog. Out of the blue, he messaged me, asking for recommendations on places to walk his dog in our town. I replied and ended up going on a dog walk with him. 2 weeks later, he shared the whole story about his toxic ex, how she cheated on him, offended him, and did crazy things like locking him out of the house or making him sleep in the spare bedroom because he snored. Hearing about all this, I offered my support and apologized for not being there for him during his previous relationship. We started talking, then dating, and eventually became a couple. Everything seemed wonderful for a few months. He met my family, but I hadn't met his, which should have raised a red flag, but I guess I missed it. He had work parties, sort of field gatherings with lots of drinking and festivities, and I attended one of them. He always emphasized that we shouldn't post anything about our relationship on social media because his psycho ex would see it and cause trouble for both of us. I believed him because he seemed kind and loving, and I never had a reason to doubt him. However, I slipped up and posted a blurry picture from one of the field parties, not realizing the consequences at the time. All this backstory will make sense soon. Let's go over what happened next. We decided to plan a trip to Wales together. He mentioned having a discount for a specific website, and we discussed all the details, like where we'd stay. He went ahead and made the booking, sharing the location, time, and date with me when I wasn't around. We were both looking forward to it. But the day before we were set to leave, he dropped a bombshell claiming that the house had double booked and our trip was canceled. I asked to see the email confirmation, but he couldn't find it, which raised my suspicions. So we changed our plans and decided to go to Cornwall instead and stay in his family's caravan. It wasn't as nice as the place we originally booked, but we made the best of it. During our trip, he took several calls outside the caravan, often saying they were from work or a work friend. He was a manager, so I didn't think too much of it, assuming it was business-related. Sometimes he'd go to a spare room to watch movies on his phone instead of spending time with me. It felt strange, but I didn't want to ruin the trip by bringing it up. On our last day, we went out for a drink. He was on his phone a lot, and I was occupied with a dog and my drinks. Just as he was about to turn off his phone, I noticed his ex's name at the top of his messaging list, with a recently sent message, complete with hearts next to her name. It seemed childish, but I kept quiet at the time because I didn't want to risk getting stranded in Cornwall if things escalated. Instead, I texted my friends about what I'd seen and asked for advice. Most of them suggested confronting him, but I didn't feel comfortable doing it while I was so far from home. The next day, we returned home, said our goodbyes, and he went back to his house. Now, things are getting pretty confusing, and I can't help but wonder what the heck just happened during our getaway, especially considering all the negative things he said about his ex. He made it sound like he'd blocked her and had no intention of ever talking to her again. So I decided to reach out to one of his exes, who I used to be friends with back in secondary school, and asked her about their relationship. I had this gut feeling that he was being dishonest and possibly cheating with his most recent ex. Turns out she confirmed my suspicions and told me that he had cheated on her too. Now, I'm kicking myself for not figuring this out sooner or even reaching out to her as a little reality check. But here's the twist. My high school friend knows his recent ex. Let's call her Molly. Molly ended up messaging me because my high school friend had told her about me and John. She wanted to know all the juicy details, like how long we'd been together and how intimate we'd been. I was feeling anxious, considering everything I'd heard about her, but I started typing out a response. Before I could hit send, though, Molly sent me a picture of 2 positive pregnancy tests. That caught me off guard, and I immediately messaged John instead. I asked him if he'd been in contact with Molly recently. He insisted he hadn't, but then I pointed out that I'd seen her name on his phone. He came up with an excuse saying it was because he wanted to see the dogs they used to share, and she'd only recently allowed him to visit them again. I pressed further, asking why he'd lied in the first place and why he only admitted it after getting caught. He didn't bother replying. So I resumed my conversation with Molly. It turns out they'd been broken up, but they never really stopped seeing each other. Throughout our 6-month relationship, there wasn't a single week when he hadn't visited her place at least 3 times. 3 times a week. All while he was in a relationship with me. I was beyond angry, especially after finding out she was pregnant, and he'd known about it all along. I couldn't resist the urge to send him a message like, "Oh, I'm sure you'll be a great father." Finally, he responded to my bait, asking how I knew. He wanted to know if I'd been talking to Molly, telling me not to believe anything she said and insisting that I should trust him over her. Meanwhile, Molly had called me and was sharing that she was 6 weeks along. He'd been sleeping with her, staying at her place most nights, and even coming over during his work breaks if he was busy that night, all while he was supposedly busy with me. What a mess! Hey there, my friends. Guess what? He actually had the audacity to ask me to be his girlfriend. Can you believe it? It's like he's living in some alternate reality or something. But here's the kicker. While he's sweet-talking me, he drops a bombshell. Apparently, his ex saw some messages on his phone from me a while back, you know, those innocent dog-walking route messages. That led to a huge argument between them. And ever since then, she's had her suspicions about me. Can't really blame her for that, can we? I mean, if we were just friends, why would she be so concerned? She spills the beans on more juicy details. Apparently, he uninvited her from a work-related party that I attended, the one I mentioned earlier. When I mentioned that I was there too, she tells me she already knew because she saw a picture on Instagram. And yup, you guessed it. They had another argument about yours truly that night as well. Here's where it gets really nasty. I find out that he was constantly reassuring her by saying some pretty awful things about me. He'd tell her I was fat, unattractive, and downright ugly. All this while, he was cozying up to me. Can you believe the nerve of this guy? But wait, there's more. She drops a bombshell of her own. She messaged me weeks ago, asking about me and John. But I had deleted it because I thought it couldn't possibly be true, and I might have been making a mistake. Man, do I regret not keeping that message? And if that's not enough, she shows me video proof of him offending her. I'm talking about him hitting their dogs, throwing one of them across the room, and body slamming her to the floor. She had hidden cameras to capture it all as evidence if she ever needed it. But here's the real kicker. All those calls he made during our trip? They were to her. Turns out I never got to meet his family because he never even told them about us. Oh, and remember that trip to Wales he mentioned? Yeah, he never actually booked it. The Cornwall holiday was meant for him and Molly. Unbelievable, right? So get this. When he bailed on the holiday with her, he spun this tale about taking his cousin because she was going through a rough patch. Lies upon lies, right? I decided to drop John a few final messages to let him know that she spilled the beans on everything. And I mean everything. He goes silent for a while, then comes back with a message so ridiculously long that I couldn't even be bothered to read it. I simply bid him farewell and wished him a nice life. Haven't exchanged a word with him since, and neither has she. Oh, by the way, she had to move to a new place because he started stalking her. Yep, he sent her letters, practically begging for forgiveness and apologizing like there was no tomorrow. Turns out I was just a side piece to a guy who had a pregnant girlfriend that he was still sleeping with and seeing every single day. Talk about a major revelation, right? Oh, I almost forgot to mention he pulled a stunt when we were on our way to Cornwall. He claimed he was stuck in traffic and trying to fix his car's oil issue for our trip. Turns out he was actually in bed with Molly, pouring his heart out about how much he loved her, the baby, and their future together. Can you believe the audacity? And to top it off, she had a termination shortly after all of this went down, as it was the best decision for her mental health after everything he had put her through. So please, let's not pass any judgment on Molly because she did what was right for her.